Do you ever get out of bed some mornings and just feel that things are spiraling out of control? Not necessarily in your own life, but in the world around you. That just so many things are happening so quickly and so fast, and that the changes are coming at warp speed, and you're just trying to get about your daily life, and you start to fear that perhaps this might be the point where you should have been saving a lot more in the way of, I don't know, not necessarily money, but maybe canned goods and dry goods and the like, and water purification systems, anything you might need to get by, because sooner or later, the way things are spinning out of control, you're going to have to be on your own. There's not going to be a whole lot to support you other than your own wits. Well, I think we're reaching one of those times, and I've got to tell you, I have loathed the thought of this day coming, but it seems like it is much, much closer. And those of us on the front lines, and even if you're doing a radio talk program in what is really a small community, you're still pretty much one of the big mouths who have been sort of needling people in the side. And those people are the people who will be looking to settle some scores, I'm sure, when that day comes. A friend of mine is pegging it. He sent me a couple of emails the last couple of days. He's pegging it at October 1st. He says that's about the time it's going to happen. Albeit, he said, with summer still here, people should be prepared, because if you have a little lead time before winter, then you won't freeze to death if something like that comes down. I mean, if it all comes collapsing down at once. 65 this morning, a beautiful morning, I should point out. It was nice and cool. 61 when I was driving into work a couple of hours ago. 8 minutes after 8 o'clock. Bill Colley with you today on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and NewsRadio1310.com. We call the program Top Story. I believe Ken Menzel from the Twin Falls County Sheriff's Department is going to be joining us in a matter of a few minutes. Also coming up a little later in the program, there's a U.S. Senator, yes, a U.S. Senator who says Christians should be getting back in the closet. She used to be there herself, but for another reason, and we can talk about that a little later in the program. But first, in a story that I think is, well, there's a handful of stories here that I think impact all of us, especially in the Magic Valley, where you have people talking still to this day about whether they're debating the merits of bringing hundreds of refugees here whose cultures may not match, especially with, let's be honest about this, whenever I hear a president say, we're not at war with Islam, we're at war with bad guys. Well, folks, if it wasn't for the Islam, we wouldn't be having the war now, would we? Well, yes, but they're perverting the religion. Well, look, maybe they are. But you know what? There are enough of them. Even the comedian Bill Maher, who is about as far left as a Bernie Sanders, even he admits that when it comes, you don't need more than a handful of a small percent to be difficult. You're going to have a huge problem on your hands. And yet you've got people that are politically correct who would rather ignore these problems. They would rather see us go down the tubes than to address the problem, because they're concerned it might hurt someone's feelings. These people, I mean, really need to have their heads examined, and I think we could all say that. I have a couple of notes, and these are all going to be related to this subject this morning. First of all, Washington Examiner is following up on some surveys done by a number of different organizations on sanctuary cities in the United States. There are over 200 sanctuary cities in 32 states and the District of Columbia. Yes, the District of Columbia has labeled itself, the city government, a sanctuary city, right under the noses of the federal government, which supposedly is enforcing the laws that these people are violating. And it says, according to CIS, that would actually be, and I've got to look that one up. I would assume it's, what I had happen here was when I was trying to, Center for Immigration Studies, I guess it is, when I was printing this story, the first two paragraphs sort of faded out on me, but then everything else is fine. And you got to figure that's the evildoer probably behind the print job. It mentions also Ohio Jobs and Justice PAC, Washington, D.C., and multiple cities around the nation's capital are included, where local police forces are told not to cooperate with the federal government, with INS and the like, who are working on many of these things. Which cities fit the definition can be open to debate. Now, we say 200 in the headline, right? Jessica Vaughn, CIS Director of Policy Studies, who helped pull the map together, said the number could go over 300. So more than 300 cities. See, if you actually look at this too, I looked at the map. The Washington Examiner provided a map today. Most everybody in Washington State and Oregon State, they're pretty much sanctuary states, not just cities or towns or villages, sanctuary states, right up along the Idaho border. And Unfortunately, that means you're going to get a lot of cross traffic going back and forth. And then Colorado. Most of Colorado is a sanctuary state. California is a sanctuary state. Iowa, the Corn Belt, is a sanctuary state. Most of the southern part of Minnesota, no surprise there, former home to the Farmer Labor Socialist Party. You've got the Northeast, same way. You don't find a lot of them in the Deep South, the old traditional South, the reviled states of the Confederacy, but that's because, of course, the media and the fellow travelers in government would say, well, that's because they're all hateful bigots down there. Don't you remember 150 years ago? Yeah, nobody was alive then, okay? Who's alive today? Let's just put it that way. And I have a couple of other points to mention on this, too, as well. This comes from the Daily Caller. President Obama orders cities and towns to racially integrate. And you wonder, how can he do that? Well, let me just... Maybe they're taking some liberties with the headline, but I don't think so. Listen to this. The Obama White House unveiled new rules yesterday to rid the country of racially segregated neighborhoods by directing cities and towns to set goals for reducing segregation and then regularly report their progress to the federal government. Under what threat? Under what penalty? Well, see, you can have a sanctuary city because that actually increases the Obama administration's hopes for desegregation and destruction of our old culture, our old traditional culture. As I've said before, liberals say we have to respect every culture on the planet, but for our own. Communities nationwide will be given a series of questions designed to help them figure out whether racial bias is causing segregated neighborhoods, racial or ethnically concentrated areas of poverty, unequal access to opportunity, or disproportionate housing needs in their jurisdiction. Very Orwellian. They will be required to set goals related to that data and publicly report on their progress every 3 to 5 years. And if you don't do it, I guess naughty, naughty. So that's coming along as well. So that could mean people in your neighborhood were going to have to, I don't know, the federal government is working on the social engineering aspect of this. Are they eventually going to come along and say, well, all right, the composition of your neighborhood is 88% white, and that doesn't match the national composition. So therefore, we're going to move a couple of black families in here, a couple of Guatemalan families in over here, and we've got some Muslims too from Syria as well. Meanwhile, those white people who are living in these homes are going to have to live on the other side of town, but we have provided the buses. No connection, by the way, to the old school busing program. Well, okay, maybe tangentially. And we're going to just move you across town, and you have 24 hours to get your things together so that we can facilitate this change, and this will be better for everybody involved. That's the argument they're going to be making. I'll tell you what, I don't see that happening tomorrow, but I could see it happening within 5 years with the direction that these totalitarians are moving. Here we go. This is from Christian Science Monitor, very liberal publication. Latinos surpass whites as largest ethnic group in California. Now, this is not necessarily because of illegal immigration. That may have at one time been a part of this. It's Roe v. Wade. Let's be honest about it, because on page 2 of this story it says, starting in the early 2000s, family growth, just the number of births over deaths, became the primary way that the Hispanic population was growing, explained, his name is Roberto Suro, a professor at the University of Southern California, while he was speaking to National Palestinian Radio. So you've got all of these families, these Latino families, who often are very devout Catholic or Pentecostals, and they're not going out and killing their babies in the womb. And then you've got all of the Anglo-Californians who are going ahead and doing that. So we're partly responsible for our own demise if you look at it that way. And unfortunately, sometimes bad behavior, God's going to reward the people who are actually following his commandments. And in this case, they're taking over the state of California. And they may be taking over great swaths of the United States. And, just saying it's not only the United States where this is happening. This comes from Crisis Magazine today. As you can see, I was doing a lot of reading this morning while I was sipping my morning coffee. Europe's water slide into dimitude. The writer, by the way, is a great writer by the name of William Kilpatrick. I've been reading his work for many, many years. He writes for a number of publications. And I've got to tell you, he writes for one called The Wanderer, or has been for a number of years. I've been reading his work there and now at Crisis. Just get this for a moment. There are 2,500 mosques in France. It's estimated that at least 5,000 are needed for France's growing Muslim population because, by the way, Muslims don't kill their babies in the wombs either. Again, at first glance, there seems to be no cause for alarm. After all, as Dali Boubacar, rector of the Grand Mosque in Paris, said, quote, "It's the same God. These are neighboring rights, fraternal, and I think that the Muslims and Christians can coexist and live together," unquote. Now, he didn't mention anything about Jews. Christian leaders concurred. Monsignor Ribaudot Dumas, spokesman for the, or Dumas, I guess in French, spokesman for the Bishops' Conference of France, told the radio station Europe 1 that, quote, "Muslims should, like Christians and Jews, be able to practice their religion." Although he mentioned Jews, even though the Muslims didn't. There might be a hint of things to come in that. So the writer says, oh, well, then that's all right. Still behind the headlines, one detects some alarming shifts in population and in spirituality. Not only are Catholics unable to keep their churches full, they're unable to keep them open. What happens when Muslims practice their faith and Christians don't, the writer asks. If these shifts continue apace, the real question will not be whether Muslims will be able to practice their religion, but whether Christians and Jews will. So again, we're giving them the rope to hang ourselves with. It boggles my mind when you look through all of this. Meanwhile, there is an admission from one of the leading lights of the American left, fellow traveler Chris Matthews, last night having a conversation on MSDNC with the former mayor of New York City, Rudolph Giuliani, about sanctuary cities. And then the leftist, Matthews, goes ahead and admits that his party needs all of these people coming here in droves, illegally or legally.
But Mayor, we all know the answer. Look, you've sized it up not quite well.
It isn't just the Republicans,
and now
Chris, it's the Democrats, too.
Look, would you trust either party to enforce the laws about illegal hiring? Would you trust either party to enforce that law?
Neither party has done it.
I know,
it used to drive me crazy.
They want cheap labor.
It used to drive me crazy.
Yeah, the Democrats want votes.
Well, when I was the mayor...
Did you hear that, Matthews? The Democrats want votes. Now, he's pointing out Republicans, like Democrats, also want cheap labor. Oh, the Democrats won't admit that. They'll go to Richard Trumka at the AFL-CIO, and they'll bow to him and tell him, we'll work for you. Don't worry. Those Republicans are meanies. And yet the Democrats take just as much money from Wall Street, the old joke about Goldman Sachs being the bank of the Democrats. They take just as much money. So their handlers, if you will, the people who actually own them, the people who've paid to play, they want cheap labor. So the Democrats have joined the Republicans in that count, but the Democrats also know that they're going to get a great many votes. Why do you think so many Republicans are now denouncing Donald Trump for speaking the truth? They're doing it because they want those votes too. But I think they've got to realize you can't have your cake and eat it too. You've got to make a principled stand at some point if this country is going to survive. And if you've got an interest beyond the tip of your own nose, which many of these candidates don't obviously have, then you're going to have to take some measures that are not necessarily going to be popular with your donor base, but will be incredibly popular with your regular base. I've got more coming up. We have a hard break, but if you have a telephone call, comment or question, please save that. I'll take it in the next segment of the program. It's 20 minutes after 8 o'clock. 66, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com, which means you can listen to us anywhere, all over the world, by just clicking on that Listen Live feature. Oh, a little bit of John Denver in our program. Well, country boys are going to be outlawed soon, because you don't live up to the ideal of the Manhattanites and the other people who now control the country. It's 8:24. Bill Colley with you, 65 at our studios. And if you'd like to reach the program today, give me a call. 736-0300. That's 736-0300. Also, you can reach me by sending me an email at bill.colley@townsquaremedia.com. Last name spelled Colley. And I should point out, Town Square, is all one word. If you're ever composing like an old-fashioned letter, I got one in the mail today. So I bring that up. If you're composing an old-fashioned letter, it's Town Square. You're on the air with Bill Colley on Top Story, and it's 8:24, coming up on 8:25.
Yeah, good morning, Bill. How you doing today?
Wonderful. What's up?
Hey, well, what you're saying is exactly right. I've had what we call a gut full of these people. They'll sit here, say like Obama, for instance. He won't call ISIS what ISIS is. They cut off somebody's head. They will not use the words that everybody wants them to use. But yet, if some little freak goes into a church, shoots somebody, which is a tragedy in its own, there's no question. First thing out of this jerk's mouth is, well, we got to do something about guns. Come down on us. Since this kid shot up them people in that church, they want to take the flag off the General Lee car. They want to take the flag off the State House. They ain't going to change a damn thing. but it's going to make somebody feel good about themselves. And everybody's feeling good is these little liberal worms that are crawling around want to affect my life because of somebody else. You were talking a second ago about abortion, okay? What the hell is the difference between an ISIS fighter who chops off somebody's head and an abortion doctor? There's no difference. But they will sit here. You're damn right. They will sit here, and they will scream and holler if we want to stop somebody from killing a little innocent baby. But yet they won't look at the facts when it comes to ISIS, when it comes to the Taliban. They'll sit here and cow-cat around and play like it's no big deal. This country is sinking. This country, when D-Day happened, this country was pulled together. 9/11 happened, this country was pulled together. And right now we got a whole bunch of people, all they worry about in this freaking world is getting votes. That's all it is. Every decision they make is on how's it going to get us a vote. Not on what's better for the country, not on what's going to help this country, what's going to make the economy better. Oh, hell no. We're going to worry about votes. The last thing in the world, once they get elected, the last thing in the world they should worry about is getting reelected. Do your job, and you will get reelected.
I thank you much for the call. I'm going to add to that. I have a friend who used to work at a radio station in Ohio, and he used to say after a call like that, "But how do you really feel?" That one is pretty obvious this morning. We're coming up on 8:27:66. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Yeah, it appears the world is just simply spinning out of control right now, and no one really has a grasp on it. When they said, following the shooting in South Carolina, and we always have to qualify that by saying, oh, it was a tragedy. Of course it was a tragedy. 9 people are dead. But the fact of the matter is, after that old line from, and I'm probably paraphrasing here, from Rahm Emanuel, no one wants to let a good crisis go to waste. So they immediately rush in. There's talk about gun control. There's talk about flag control. And, this just goes on and on and on. But this poor woman is killed in San Francisco, and you're not hearing a peep out of these lefties at all about it because it suddenly reflects on their policies. Hello, it's mind-boggling. As I said yesterday, when it comes to Supreme Court decisions on something like same-sex marriage, they tell us, well, that's the law now. You've got to abide by it. And you know what? If you're talking about nullification, you're no better than any of those racist Confederates from 150 years ago. But in these 200 to 300 sanctuary cities, they're simply nullifying the law, and that's considered okay. I'm sorry, but if I'm expected to play by the law, then they should be able to do it too as well. We have another caller with us. You're up next, and you're on the air on News Radio 1310 KLIX. Hello?
Hello?
You're on the air.
I am on the air. I was just calling to say that we need to go to call to arms to all veterans, and let's get this thing stopped. They keep talking about it, but there's nobody doing nothing.
Well,
everybody's scared to walk out of their house and say something because somebody else is going to, say something different, and somebody else will back them up. So here comes the killing again, and more people being hurt because they stood up for their rights.
I thank you for the call. I'm just going to point out some people are doing something about it. There's a video online that was posted, I believe, yesterday of a county clerk somewhere in Kentucky, the abbreviation being KY. Don't read anything into that. But she refused a marriage license for a same-sex couple. And in Tennessee, you've got several of the county clerks, who've actually stepped up and resigned and said, we can't do this in good conscience. So there are people at least trying at this point to make an effort. And I think that that's important to remember. And it's got to start small like that, and then it's going to build into maybe perhaps some sort of a mighty river, and that's what we need. Hey, quickly, just want to remind people, coming up next week on the program, next Wednesday between 8:30 and 9 o'clock, Better Health with Tripp Family Medicine. Dr. Jonathan Tripp is going to be joining us, and he's going to be talking about periodontal disease, that is, bleeding gums, and what that could really signal about your health. And you may know that it's a harbinger of heart disease. Going to bring along somebody, in fact, from a dental background with him to have a discussion about that. We urge you to give us a call between 8:30 and 9 o'clock that morning. That's Better Health with Tripp Family Medicine every Wednesday morning here at 8:30 on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. And remember, life's too short not to feel good. Ken Menzel is coming up from the Twin Falls County Sheriff's Department in just a few minutes. Mafia music. I wonder if it's for the gay mafia. 844. That's a nickname that has been given. Actually, it was quite humorous. I was reading this on a website called Young Conservative the other day, and they referenced this. Young conservatives reflecting on same-sex weddings. Can I tell you what the writer was talking about? Here you go. He's referring to what's taking place in Kansas. Governor Sam Brownback is about to make a whole lot of enemies in what I affectionately call the gay mafia, the writer says, which is ironically comprised of mostly straight liberals who have taken it upon themselves to try forcing the rest of the world to violate their religious beliefs and accept gay marriage and the homosexual lifestyle as normal. Brownback issued an executive order that's aimed at protecting the religious liberty of clergy in the state from being attacked by folks who might try taking legal action against churches who refuse to officiate gay weddings. And, we've been told that simply is, they're not going to be forcing people to do these same-sex weddings in churches, especially these. Now, the United Methodist Church and the Episcopal Church, some of those churches are already doing these things, but in churches that adhere more to what the Bible actually says, they won't be taking place, or we're told they won't be taking place. And yet there are some very frightening individuals out there with positions of power who see this entirely. Well, let me share this with you. This comes from LifeSite News. U.S. Senator, and this is what she said, individuals don't have religious freedom, just churches. You get that? Now, I've read that First Amendment to the Constitution. In fact, I have my little handy-dandy pocket Constitution here from the Heritage Foundation, by the way. They give these away. And I've been carrying this thing around with me for several years, and I just have to tell you, I find it rather disturbing. But if we could talk a little bit about what this actually says. This is the First Amendment to the Constitution. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or of the right of the people peacefully to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. But doesn't say anything about just limiting that free expression of your faith, or free exercise, that is, of your faith to churches. It says the free exercise thereof. It's talking about people because it's also talking about abridging the freedom of speech or of the press and the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. So they're referencing the people and not churches. So you've got to ask yourself, who is this dingaling in the U.S. Senate? Well, Senator Tammy Baldwin is a Democrat from Wisconsin, the nation's first openly lesbian elected to the U.S. Senate, addressed the Supreme Court's, is it Obergefell or Obergefell? Kind of Germanic sounding. The Obergefell versus Hodges decision on June 27. She was on MSDNC's Up with Steve Kornacki. Baldwin responded that the First Amendment gave Americans no right to exercise religion outside the sanctuary of their church, synagogue, or mosque. That view contrasts with a broad and deep body of law saying that individuals have the right to exercise their religion freely under the First Amendment, not merely to hold or teach their beliefs. So what part of that is she not reading? Well, I'm sure if she got elected to the U.S. Senate, you would think at some point that she may have actually read the Constitution. But that doesn't, well, she did, of course. Let's be honest. At some point, if she didn't read it, somebody read it to her, or she's heard that amendment before. She's essentially saying we're nullifying it, or we're redefining it to mean what I believe. Now, 15 years ago, this woman herself would have been in the closet. Now she's demanding that Christians, and also Jews and Muslims who may object to what's going on, that they be stuffed into closets as well. I'll tell you what, if you come along and you try to force, let's say, a Roman Catholic priest to perform one of these weddings, he's likely going to go to jail before he would actually do it. I would dare say, especially in the Southern Baptist Church and in the LDS Church, you would have the same thing happen. They would go to jail before they would go through with it. What do you think the reaction would be at the local mosque? I don't even want to think about that reaction. And, you hear this and you just say, you know what, liberals? You want them coming here so badly. All right, go ahead, go down to their house of worship and go in and tell them you want them to perform a same-sex wedding. What you're going to get in response may be far, far worse than a guy just saying no and say, put the cuffs on me and take me away. They don't seem to understand that, though, do they? It's beyond their comprehension. 848, Bill Colley with you this morning on Top Story. on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. And, of course, you can call our program this morning if you have a question or comment. That telephone number is 736-0300, 736-0300, or email me at bill.colley@townsquaremedia.com. And, of course, I try to check the email frequently. I do, however, give more credence to the people who are actually calling the program than, let's say, emailing the program. There was a young fellow, and I just came across this morning too as well. His attorney says he was drunk. Well, people would say, well, that's no excuse. I'm telling you what he's doing or what he has done. This is in Nebraska. Man accused of burning gay pride flag was pulling drunken prank, not committing hate crime. The lawyer for the Omaha man accused of stealing a lesbian couple's gay pride flag, setting it on fire and waving it in front of their house, said Wednesday that the act was a drunken prank, not the hate crime prosecutors depict. In other words, the guy's stupid. Omaha attorney James Martin Davis said Cameron Mayfield, who lives about a block from the women, didn't know they were gay when he burned the rainbow flag about 12:30 a.m. Sunday. Really, why do you think they'd be flying it? Now, before I get too harsh about this, let me just say what this guy's guilty of is theft. And arson, if you'd like to look at it that way, too. And, setting a fire anywhere is a bad idea, especially in a residential neighborhood, an open fire like that. Your grill might be one thing, but going out and setting a flag, a fire and running up and down the street in front of their house, it clearly shows that this guy is dumber than a box of rocks. So, yes, send him off to jail for theft and also for the arson charge. But as far as the hate crime goes, look, if you can burn an American flag and get away with it, then I would suggest you can go ahead, and people are burning Confederate flags, and they're getting away with it. But why is it all of a sudden such a heated issue if someone is actually, no pun intended there, burning a rainbow flag? It's just a piece of cloth, right? That's what they tell us about the American flag. They always say, well, it's just a symbol, and you can read into it what you want. And that's exactly true about the Confederate flag. Some people see the Confederate flag as just their regional flag and a sense of pride, and a handful of yokels see it as the sign of their racist beliefs. And so, but they tell us, well, you're just reading into it. So, what's the big deal about burning a flag? Look, you've never interviewed the survivors of Iwo Jima. I have. And all I can tell you is once I walked away, when I was a young reporter, and I was, in fact, somewhat more of a liberal guy when I was covering news in my early days, and I had to go out and interview these men who had survived that terrible, terrible, terrible battle. And they told me, and it was only, the battle lasted well over a month, but it was the fifth day, I think, that the flag went up. And the shooting and the carnage continued for a month afterward. But they told me that as soon as that flag went up, that the feeling that went through them, the ripple, that chill that goes up your spine, that's when I changed my mind about this thing being just a symbol that you can urinate on, that you can burn, or that you can shred. Because of what they told me it meant to them and the courage it gave them to move forward. That, to me, spoke volumes. But the fact of the matter is, the courts say you can go ahead and burn the American flag as free expression. I knew, though, that someone somewhere was going to decide, well, okay, I'm going to burn the pride flag. And as soon as that happened, there was going to be the screaming and yelling and gnashing of teeth from the American left about how terrible this is. Will they now? Well, I guess a hate crime law means that they've passed a law against burning it, doesn't it? A couple of other quick things. This is a county clerk. I mentioned her earlier. A same-sex couple in Kentucky looking for a marriage license on Monday was rejected by Rowan County Clerk Kim Davis, and the whole incident was caught on video. Ooh. David Moore recalled the episode on his Facebook page, writing, quote, "We were denied a marriage license on Monday, July 6th at the Rowan County Clerk's office," unquote. He doesn't say if he fell on the floor and had an epileptic seizure and needed a Valium or whatever else, and that he'll never be able to go out of the house again because it's caused him so much harm and post-traumatic stress disorder, so now he needs a large chunk of cash and punitive damages. Davis, by the way, the clerk, is already staring down the barrel of a lawsuit filed by the ACLU for refusing to obey the law. She just simply says, look, as a Christian, I'm not doing it. In Tennessee, which is neighboring, for you public school graduates, is a neighboring state to Kentucky, they're very, very close. One sets atop the other on the map. And don't read anything into that either. In Tennessee, several clerks who said they could not perform these ceremonies have resigned. That happened in the county where I lived in southern Delaware. I had a friend, a neighbor, and he was a devout Methodist, not of the liberal persuasion, and he was working as the clerk doing all of the weddings in the county, and they changed the law in the state, and all of a sudden he said, well, I can't run for re-election, and he walked away from the job. And somebody who said they could do that was elected, who was also a friend and neighbor, but that's a story for another day. I had to tell you something, and this is what we're looking at, I think, in the future, and I think Mark Steyn, you've heard Mark Steyn before, filling in for Rush Limbaugh. He should have his own radio show. He's often a talking head on television as well, but he's a brilliant, brilliant writer. He was on a radio show last week, and he was talking about this Supreme Court decision about same-sex marriage. And a caller to the program came on and said that we're looking at what the Germans had to deal with in the 1930s. Just keep your head down, she said, and the storm will pass. And then she said, well, how'd that work out? Well, some fellow who was listening is a liberal college professor, and he wrote in and said, in one corner we have government recognition of marriage contracts between gays. In the other corner we have Jews, Catholics, gays, their sympathies, and other undesirables being put in Nazi concentration camps. One of these things is nothing like the other, the liberals said, unless you're a lunatic. Well, Steyn said, wait a second, let's take a look at this. Now, this is a little lengthy, and I know they tell us in talk show school that we're not supposed to read things, that we're just supposed to just talk off the top of our head, and then kibitz with a few telephone callers and the like. But I cannot match Mark Steyn, so I'm going to read a few paragraphs of what he's talking about in his comparison. All societies, he says, exist on a continuum. Neither Claudine, the caller, nor I said a word about concentration camps. But you give the strong impression, he's referring to the professor, that that's only the fact or the only fact you know about Nazi Germany. Nazis equals concentration camps. No wonder you think everything divides neatly into opposing corners. He says, well, the world isn't defined by corners. He said things start off there, but they work their way toward the center of the room. He says, Claudine and I were talking about Germany in the 30s before the concentration camps and the final solution. Imagine being a middle-class German. It's 1933. No one's talking about exterminating millions of people. That would be, in other words, lunatic, wouldn't it? And you belong to a people that regards itself as the most civilized on the planet with unsurpassed achievements in literature, music, and science. You might, if you were so minded, call it Teutonic exceptionalism. That means German, by the way. And you're progressive, too. You pioneered the welfare state under Bismarck and prototype hate speech laws under the Weimar Republic. And yes, some of the beer hall crowd are a bit rough, but German Jews are the most assimilated on the planet. The idea that such a society would commit genocide is not just lunatic. It's literally unimaginable. So don't even bother, Steyn writes, trying to imagine that. Instead, try to imagine it's early 1933. The Nationalist Socialist German Workers' Party is the largest party in parliament, and thus President von Hindenburg has appointed its leader, Herr Hitler, as Chancellor. Not yet Der Führer. Just Chancellor, the same position that Frau Merkel holds today. And the National Socialist German Workers' Party starts enacting its legislative program, and so a few weeks later the Civil Service Restoration Law is introduced. Under the law, Jews would no longer be allowed to serve as civil servants, teachers, or lawyers, the last two professions being heavily influenced, by the way, by Jewish workers. But the wily old fox Hindenburg knows a thing or two, so as president he refuses to sign the bill into law unless there are exemptions for those who've been in the civil service since before World War I, and for those who served during the Great War, or had a father or a son who died in action, the writer says. And the practical effect of these amendments is that hardly any Jew in the public service has to lose his job. And so, in April of 1933, it would be easy to say if you were a middle-class German seeking nothing other than a quiet life that, yes, these Nazis are a bit uncouth, but the checks and balances are still just about working. What's the worst they can do? And then the following year, Hindenburg died, and his amendments were scrapped. Right now, across the land, you have clerks resigning because they cannot, in good conscience, issue those licenses. He says they are observant Christians, which is to say they hold the same view of marriage that Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton once did. And he goes on to say, so observant Christians will no longer be able to serve as town or county clerk. Are comparisons really so lunatic? The logic of 1933 Civil Service Restoration Act is that the German public service will be Judenrein. Well, now we're going to have a United States public service that is Christian-rein. But don't worry, Anthony Kennedy of the Supreme Court, like Hindenburg, says he has struck a balance. News is coming up next. Bill Colley with you for another hour today. The great Mark Stein.